Hi everyone. Welcome to The Wheel of Mind, a character POV reread podcast dedicated to Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time series. This season, we are taking a deep dive into Moiraine's POV. I'm Lajara Dane of the White Ajah.
Hi, and I'm Gisco Samaras, a scholar from Ilium. We would like to remind our listeners that this is a reread podcast, so we will potentially spoil anything from all 15 books. Read that as we will spoil everything from all 15 books. Today, we're here to discuss chapters 6 and 7 from New Spring. Lajara, can you start us off with your synopsis of chapter 6?
Sure, thanks. Chapter 6 is called Surprises. The chapter opens when a novice named Setsuko is waking up, accepted to get their work started for the day. She's described as looking bleak and merely kind of scratching at the accepted's doors. She's apparently so sad because she will, quote, never reach the shawl. I'm not sure who has said this or what that means. Maybe she's too weak in the power or decided not to do the accepted test or something. But she's got to stay for at least a few more months instead of just being put out of the tower right away so that she can be trained enough not to be a danger to herself or others. So naturally, she's really despondent about this. Moiraine feels some sympathy for her and she's inclined to say something comforting, but there's really no time. They've barely got time to wash up, scrub their teeth, eat some breakfast, and be on their way to the stables before work. Moiraine and Siuan are really excited to hear from Sherion that the Aiel have just retreated east across the river. They're hoping that means they could have some justification to get to the furthermost camps near Dragonmount today. Instead, the party is crashed by Mirian Sedai, the mistress of novices, showing up. Moiraine's terrified that this means she's about to be tested because she did say pretty recently that Moiraine's ready, although Moiraine herself doesn't feel ready at all compared to the way everyone's talking about her readiness for the test.
Right.
Mirian claims that the Amyrlin thinks Moiraine must be in shock, so they've been talking about this, and they need her to do some indoor clerical work instead of going out into the camps. You see, many of the accepted, some of whom are illiterate when they get to the tower as novices, have terrible handwriting. Many of the lists of names need to be copied. For some reason, to Moiraine's shock and disappointment, Siuan is encouraging Mirian and asking if she can go along to help. Siuan hates writing even more than Moiraine. What's this girl up to? Moiraine is thinking. Once Mirian deposits the girls into their workspace near the Amyrlin's apartments, Siuan reveals what she has puzzled out. With access to the already collected names, they can comb them for children that fit the prophecy and the foretelling. So they have a much better chance of finding the dragon reborn this way by reviewing all the records than a chance encounter out in the camps. Siuan abruptly switches to asking why Moiraine is supposed to be brooding or in shock because Moiraine hadn't told her about her uncles. So she now tells her about her mean old uncles who we found out in the last chapter have been offed sometime during the war, and how she felt guilty about not being sad about it. Siuan responds in a really validating way because she has some terrible uncles too that she's also estranged from and wouldn't be sad if they died. And she tells Moiraine, you can pray for their souls, I would too, but don't really trouble yourself any more than that about it for people who don't deserve to be remembered well. They head to breakfast, see everyone scarfing down their breakfast, excited to leave the tower and the city, but in contrast to that, Siuan and Moiraine instead draw out their meal and drink their tea for as long as they can until the kitchen staff kick them out. I mean, who wouldn't want to caffeinate well before a boring day of office work anyway? After the staff kick them out, they return to their workspace that Mirian had showed them earlier, and they start sifting through the papers. Moiraine is horrified to realize how vague some of the information is. Some people are recorded as having been born within sight of Dragonmount. Some of the mothers are recorded as being from incredibly vague geographic areas like from Andor. Some of the babies are born within sight of Tar Valin's walls. Like Dragonmount and Tar Valin are big landmarks. That could be a lot of places, and it's not very specific. This research project is sounding a lot harder than it did when they started, Moiraine thinks. She's not very excited about it anymore. After more and more of this tedious work and not seeing any promising names, she and Siuan break for lunch to have some bread and lentil soup, which admittedly sounds really good to me. That sounds like a pretty typical lunch, lentil soup at my house. Right. Elida shows up and just looks at them, but she doesn't seem to find anything to pick on them about, so she just leaves as swiftly as she sort of glided up. At the end of their workday, when they set the copied sheets in the Amyrlin study, Moiraine feels discouraged that they don't have any leads. After a night of fitful sleep, the girls head straight to their office workspace after breakfast without being told. So they were kind of hoping to ask for forgiveness instead of permission there, because nobody told them to do the same work today, but nobody told them not to. After they start sifting through the papers, clerks show up to do it. So someone has been assigned to this work, but Moiraine and Siwan just ignore them and keep working. And then the Amyrlin herself shows up, saying that she'd meant to give Moiraine the day off, but Moiraine does one of those Aes Sedai style lies to make it sound like she needs this clerical work to cope with her grief about her uncles.
Yes.
Tamara is satisfied with their answers and leaves. The girls start copying down the most likely names they find into little personal notebooks. But Moiraine keeps getting interrupted from her work. Sister after sister, a lot of them important people like sitters of the hall, question her about Cairhien and politics and succession, with one finally outright suggesting that she become the next queen of Cairhien. So instead of just Dragon Reborn nightmares, she now tosses and turns to images of her sitting on the Sun Throne while mobs destroy the city. Thus ends Chapter 6, Surprises.
Right. And there were a lot of surprises in here, mostly for the characters, not the readers. It was very good. And there's all these little touches that are thrown in there. And I guess I'm just a details person when it comes to this. As you said, Setsuko, who's scratching at the door, it seems to trigger a memory to me that this may be a cultural thing. I believe in some of the cultures, that's what they do, is some will knock, some will barge in, some will scratch at the door. So that may partially be a cultural thing. When they talk about, she'll never make the shawl, it seems to be one of those things that has probably been whispered about. It's just common knowledge. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Just gossip around. She's never going to make the shawl. She just doesn't have enough power or enough training, or she'll never stick to it. In fact, it seemed like the only thing they were certain about with her is that, if they didn't turn her loose soon, she would try to run away.
Mm-hmm.
They said the phrase there, but all were caught eventually. So there were people who tried to run away. There were women who just couldn't handle the terrors of what it took, the rigors of the training to become Aes Sedai. And then this one little phrase in that exchange stuck out to me. I think it's just a thought of Moraine's, but I put it down as a quote because you know how I love pulling quotes from the Wheel of Time. It says, when the tower saw a fault in one of its students, that fault was usually cured one way or another. That goes back to what we were talking about in some of the earlier chapters of just the brutal rigors of training in the tower too. And we've talked about that. We've kind of compared it to our current military and things of that nature. But the more I've considered that, the more I see that would be necessary if you have women with this kind of power, not just from the true source, but this kind of political power. Women who may advise kings and queens, and that kings and queens' children, and that kings and queens' grandchildren, may be a powerful influence in a region for hundreds of years. They would need to be very self-disciplined. There would need to be ways to break them of bad habits, so you didn't allow someone who would be ruled by their own vices and their own greed. They would have to put the concerns of the tower first. But I saw that phrase as being so illustrative of that, that when the tower saw a fault in one of its students, that fault was usually cured one way or another.
That's a really great point. I think that brings some balance to our discussion about the tower's methods that we started in the first episode.
Yes. On the second day of their clerical work, when the Amyrlin Tamara, she catches them, copying names, just kind of scrutinizes them. She comes in, and Moiraine, she has her little book. She got the idea from Siwan, who was more prepared. But she has a little book, and when they find a likely name, they write the information down in secret in a little pocket in their dress. When the Amyrlin came in, of course, Moiraine, she's trying to finish pocketing the book, stand up and do a curtsy, and try to hide the motion of what she was doing as well, and gets an ink blot on her robes. Yeah, that part was, I don't know, it's a very small thing, but it seemed kind of significant of what was going on too, because here you see a woman who's still kind of got that awkwardness. She's doing something she knows she's not really supposed to be doing, but she and Siwan they're doing what their natural curiosity drives them to do. Since they were there to hear Guittara with the foretelling, they can't unknow what they know.
Mhm.
They've got to keep digging. They've got to keep digging. So here they're storing away these names, their own private lists, which the Amerlin also has her own private list that she's working through.
Yeah.
But you see this wanting to hide this. Well, you see this uncertainty in Moiraine and awkwardness, like I said, trying to do these 2 or 3 things at once. And it's just so humanizing with her. It makes me really love Moiraine that much more as a character, as a person, not just as Sedai, and the strong woman who finds a way to lead the Dragon Reborn at every and any cost to herself. But we just see how far she comes from where she is here in New Spring to see that the strong Moiraine. Basically, she takes what the Amerlin says and twists it around. Well, she just told me to clean the ink spot out of my dress.
Yeah, I like that.
Theon's like, no, that's not what I heard. Then she says, you have to listen to what people mean as well as what they say, Theon.
Which is very Deus de Mar, Game of
Yes.
Houses. I'm not surprised that Moiraine would be the one reading too much into things, or maybe reading the right amount. It's hard to say, but when I read Tamra's statement there, I sort of read it the same way. It could just be as a rereader and sort of unconsciously, I didn't explicitly remember that scene and how Moiraine interpreted it, but as I read it, I interpreted it the same way Moiraine did. Or I think she might have actually been hinting at it.
Yes, I believe she was. I believe that was because of the wording, as Sedai, she couldn't tell Moiraine, yes, you can do that, because that was forbidden for acceptance. And she wasn't going to lie to her. But so she kind of twists the words. Just mentioning it, I believe, was a way to dangle the carrot and tempt her. Yeah, as soon as my back's turned, you do what you've got to do.
Yeah.
Because, this is a waste of good cloth otherwise. There's no real way to get ink out of white cloth. It's not going to happen.
That was in some of my notes too. So I noted the ink stain thing and the way Moiraine read Tamra's words there. I noticed a little bit of slightly inconsistent characterization of Moiraine, but I actually think it's not indicative of a fault in the writing, but more so adolescence or emerging adulthood, whatever you would consider this stage of life for her. She's still trying out some of these things.
Well,
so
how many people do you know are that one-dimensional?
Right, exactly.
We all have those things that tempt us to do good and tempt us to do bad, and sometimes we have certain impulses that we may not even fully understand or describe to ourselves, even perceive them in and of ourselves, yet they're there. And so occasionally you see her, just as anyone would, acting on impulse that at times may be atypical, but it's part of her, who she is. And to me, it just adds so much more depth to the character.
Mm-hmm. Her facility with Deus de Mar seems a little up and down in this chapter. And so Moiraine was a little shakier with the Deus de Mar earlier in the chapter when she didn't immediately see, like Siwan did, the potential of looking through the names and how that could actually speed up their search dramatically. Siwan had to tell her. But then later in the chapter, Moiraine reads a lot into the Amerlin's words about reading that as being allowed to clean the ink from her dress. But then at the end, she goes back to not really working it out until somebody comes right out and hits her over the head with the information where they're asking her very leading questions about Cairhien and politics. Right. And you would think that she would have a sense of where that's going. She tells the sisters that she hadn't really thought about the succession at all, which I find a little strange, but I'm not sure if that was completely true. We haven't seen her think about it, but maybe it's happened off screen, so to speak, or maybe she really hadn't been thinking about it because she's so consumed with this search for the Dragon Reborn. But it was interesting to see that inconsistency. Moiraine likes to think of herself as the one who's good at Deus de Mar and reading people, and Siwan's the one who's good at working out puzzles of different kinds, like the blacksmith puzzle they've been referring to a couple times.
Yes, and that was kind of my thoughts on this as we discussed it. Was Siwan is more of the puzzles you can see. Moiraine, she's a little more adept at puzzles or reading people and putting clues together with people, body language and what they don't say and things like that. And you see that in the upcoming chapter 7 as well, in a couple of different things. It seems like at one point Siwan leaps ahead of her And in the other
Mhm.
points, Moraine is, well advanced and has to kind of get Siwan caught up in what's going on.
Mm.
And they kind of admire that about each other, and it blows their mind sometimes that that the other can think that way.
Yeah.
It's just the differences in the people in the two characters.
Mhm.
I'm wondering about the secession of houses that occur in politics.
Mhm.
If it's not more kind of a willfulness, not seeing it,
Mm.
perhaps that's something she just really doesn't want. I could see in one sense her turning away from her old life to, stepping out of that. I'm going to have nothing to do with the House de Madrid anymore, than I have to, other than just being a member of the House. I'm going to turn away from the politics of it and walk away from that in order to embrace the teachings of the Tower, in order to be as Sedai. I think to fully immerse herself into that as much as possible. And then this side quest, if you would, of being the one to locate the Dragon Reborn. I believe it's more of a willful, really had not thought about that. That's one of those
Mm.
things, I just don't want to get into that. I don't want to go there.
Yeah,
Maybe not.
that's a
Maybe I'm reading that wrong, but that was,
no, I
it's
could
just
see
a
that.
thought that came to me, that she reads people very well.
Yeah.
She, even right now, in some ways, she'll play people like a violin.
Mhm.
Yet, in this instance, it took what, 5 sisters or 6 sisters before she started catching
Yeah.
on, and the last one, Jarna Malari, just had to come right out and say it.
Right. When the
Um,
reader is already following that train, but by
yes,
the time Jarna says it.
yes,
Yeah, there's got to
just
be something, some kind of repression going on there. In my rereading yesterday, just finished the chapter of Nynaeve's accepted test in The Great Hunt. And we know that Siwan and Moraine have already been through these 3 ter'angreal rings where you have to face your fears and walk away from them to want to
yes,
advance into becoming Aes Sedai. And if you don't walk away from them, you don't come out of the ter'angreal.
right, right.
So if maybe that is one of the things she had to put away was I don't know if she ever had any to begin with, but if she had any political ambitions for the Sun Throne, that may be one of the things she had to walk away from and
Yeah,
very much put that out of her mind.
I think she was so put off by the excesses of her uncles, by the way the name of the House de Madrid had already been lowered and kind of drugged through the mud, and then they take it to an extreme. I think she really had just completely turned her back on the thought of politics, and to
Probably.
the point of not playing dumb, but just honestly, yeah, she was focusing in a completely different direction. And then, of course, as you said, her dreams of what that would be like, it would be a nightmare. It would
Mhm.
be a nightmare for her, it would be a nightmare for the country. Another thing is kind of telling about her personality here. When they begin discussing her family and older sisters, I think the oldest is Anna Veer.
Mhm.
So, of course, she's the one that she's got nothing on her mind except, horses and hawking. And it has this little phrase out there: no one would trust her temper far worse than Moraine's had ever been. So Moraine, a lot of the things we've seen here, I believe it goes back to the first, where the Tower sees a fault in its students. That fault is usually cured one way or another.
Mm.
We don't see a lot of temper from Moraine. That's probably been beaten out of her, worked out of her, so she doesn't
Yeah.
automatically respond with a temper. She's got a temper, that she has learned to control it and not let it control her. Again, it goes back to the thoroughness of the Tower training.
Hmm. I think so. Speaking of tower training, before we move on to chapter 7, I have a quick rant about the way this project was set up, where they're trying to find the Dragon Reborn
Yes.
with the facade that they're using is that they're giving gold to these women as like, oh, good for you, you're helping to rebuild society after the war.
Right.
So we're going to reward everybody who had a baby during this time. This being Wheel of Mind, I'm going to take a quick rant to talk about how we would want to study the mind well, or do any kind of studying when it comes to people. This project is super disorganized, and I've got some problems with the fact that no white or brown sisters designed this research project in a better way. Moiraine notes some of the problems that you have if you don't properly define variables in your study. Scientists use what they call operational definitions for their variables, and that means that you define a variable so clearly that somebody knows exactly how you would measure it by your definition, so that they could
Right.
measure it the same way. So you would have no vague or ambiguous terms. The questions they gave the girls are pretty vague, like take down the woman's name, the baby's name, the father's name, where they're from, and where the baby was born. But they don't really tell the accepted how specific that needs to be. And it seems like the accepted are not prompting up with any follow-up questions to their respondents, to those women, to get any better data. Maybe because the rest of the girls besides Sawan and Moraine don't understand what the project is about. They don't understand the importance of it, but I feel like they should have some better guidelines.
At least you would think there would be a map somewhere. You know, they would provide a map with, you know, divided off in little quadrants or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Number them, you know, A1 to whatever, just like you're playing Battleship current day.
Yeah.
And be able to list where that camp was.
Right. That would be a great way to sort of quantify it.
Right. Perhaps the child was born when the camp was in another location, but it gives you a general idea.
Mm-hmm.
And chances are the camp has not moved far from that. That was one of the things. I was not going to touch on it to that degree, but in chapter 7, when, you know, so many of the descriptions come in, born within sight of Dragon Mount.
Oh, I know.
Well, you can see Dragon Mount for leagues. You know,
you can.
They can put them anywhere, north, south, east, or west of Dragon.
Mm-hmm.
And there was very little else. It would say, you know, so and so's camp, but no one knows where that was located.
No.
So there was, as you said, it's very chaotic.
There's a whole people that I think they're leaving out of their survey too that I don't think our characters have thought of. Well, there's a few factors they're not thinking of that could really mess up the way they're collecting this data. The Dragon Reborn, I mean, we know this, but I feel like our characters might be able to think about this possibility as well. Could be born to someone who dies during the birthing process, but they're not considering anything about maternal mortality, like, oh, let's give gold to these families. Maybe, during this time, if we're assuming there's not yellow sisters attending every birth, which it seems like there's not, right, we could probably assume that maternal mortality exists in this world, and that's something they could be aware of. Maybe the infants usually die as well in this situation, but I would imagine there's got to be some who survive.
That would tend to go with what were normal expectations, right, of childbirth and delivery in a postmodern medical world. Yes.
Yeah. I also think that there's women they're probably not capturing in their survey. It's interesting on the lists. I don't think we've seen so far anybody saying they don't know who the father is.
Right.
Which you would think out of these huge numbers, just surprising numbers of women giving birth, you'd find at least some who are not willing to name a father or unsure. And many of the women who are following around armies could be sex workers or any number of other women who are in vulnerable positions where they wouldn't be able to keep a child.
Right. I think it'd be more surprising to not have that situation.
Right. Yeah. And I don't know, they're not even thinking about this.
Neither did they think, could the child belong to an Aiel?
Of course. Yeah. There you go. That's another huge bias in their study.
Yeah. It just never occurred to them that the child might be Aiel, born to a mother who didn't survive. Perhaps it was not meant to cross their minds.
I'm sure. I mean, this plot, for plot reasons, they didn't think about this stuff. But just for those of you out there who were thinking about throwing together a survey ever,
right.
Maybe take some more time to think about it, not just, I'm going to do this research project. Everyone go out and collect data first thing in the morning. So as a logical white Aja, I say that's what happens when you get a blue in charge as an Amyrlin. They're very passionate about their causes, but they're just going to jump in there and do stuff, and maybe they should have thought it through some more.
Well, but then to play devil's advocate on that, or maybe it's Smokadian's advocate, however you want to word it, at the same time, she does not even want most other sisters to know what's going on about the foretelling, about the fact that Dragon Reborn has been reborn or will be reborn. We just know it's sometime after the foretelling. It's only information they have to go on. She's trying to keep it vague, I think, in her mind, to keep people from catching on.
Yeah.
Keep people from seeing through just how thin an excuse this is.
Yeah, it is a flimsy one.
The census information, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of sisters are probably see through the fact, hey, there's more going on here, but there's not enough for them to glean what's going on.
Right.
Because this is very atypical, even for the White Tower.
That was all the notes I had about this chapter. Did you have anything else?
No, I think I pretty much jumped in and talked over you and covered them all.
No, you're fine.
All right, so on to chapter 7. Chapter 7 is entitled The Itch. In this one, we see Moiraine and Siuan continue compiling lists of names for the Amyrlin. So it's a new day, same drudgery, but of course they're attacking it with that same zeal that they've had the entire time, securing the knowledge that they will get the name first. They're just certain, as all young people are, that they're going to have the answers. And as we talked about earlier, Moiraine starts conjecturing to herself the vagueness of the locations. Even thought to herself how so many women, even common women, would know enough of the prophecies of the Dragon Reborn that they wouldn't admit it if their child was born on the slopes of Dragon Mount. And was thinking to herself of how careful the questioner must be to get the truth out of these women without scaring them off. Early in the morning, as they're about their tasks here, Tamara, the Amyrlin, visits them, and Moiraine is given a note to be delivered to Karine Nagashi of the Green Aja. So we, kind of travel with Moiraine as she gets to go to the Aja quarters, which normally they cannot go to. Accepteds are not allowed to go there, and unless they're on a task or an errand such as this. We find out this kind of quirk of Moiraine's. It says when she learns that there is something which she doesn't know, she feels this vague itch. She describes it as being kind of behind her shoulder blade, or someplace you can't reach, and it's a mental curiosity. Something really bothers her when she realizes there's some information here I don't know. A few examples of that is she's traveling through the Green Quarters. She sees there are depictions of swords carved into every door. Many of these are lacquered different colors. So she knows there's probably a code in this. There's something to be read in this, perhaps some type of martial ranking system. But she knows there's no way she would ever know without joining the Green, which she does not want to do. Again, she gets another one of these little itches when she delivers the note to Karine. Karine reads the note, and she responds. Of course, her warders, they feel that something's up. They stop what they're doing, and they stand up, ready to go. Karine kind of forgets in a way that Moiraine is there, and she turns to them and says, Tamara wants me urgently, but she doesn't say why. So this itch of Moiraine's, this need to know, incessant need to know, is really kicking in here. She wants to know what's up and what's going on. She heads back to her workstation, but before she gets there, she meets Siuan coming the other way. Siuan also has a note being carried to another sister, Aisha Ravinos of the Grey Aja. Now, just with a brief bit of information, Moiraine, she kind of realizes these are two of the more senior ladies in their Ajas. Again, they're not supposed to think of this, but some of the older Aes Sedai. And so she immediately puzzles out that the Amyrlin is sending specific sisters on missions to locate the Dragon Reborn. Siuan, she kind of says, I feel like my head's going to explode. You puzzle this out from 2 messages and you don't know the contents of either message. Moiraine, she kind of infers this. She figures it out real quickly that the Amyrlin is choosing certain sisters whom she trusts more than others. She's delivering them on missions. She's evidently filling them in with the missing information about Kitara's foretelling and what they're doing. And also, she figures out that if they locate the Dragon Reborn, he will not be brought to the tower for training. In fact, he would be kept far from the tower and trained in secret. It carries us to the next day where they deliver 3 more messages to Malin Argania, whom we've already met in previous chapters, to a sister from the Brown, Valera Garavni, and one from the Yellow, Ludis Danan. Just kind of mentioned almost in passing that Eledra Najaf was raised to the new keeper of the Chronicles to replace Kitara. Eledra is described as being a very spare woman, close-cropped white hair, who wears no jewelry other than her great serpent ring. So she kind of comes across as a no-nonsense kind of woman. Yet she catches Moiraine trying to spy on who's coming in or out of the Amyrlin study. Again, this is part of she and Siuan trying to to take the puzzle pieces of what all was going on in the tower and put it all together and understand it. When she catches Moraine, Moraine answers her truthfully without evasion, and Allegra kind of lets her go. She doesn't overtly say, "I know that you're spying, but you go back. Don't let this happen again." So it's a very short chapter. Not a lot of action takes place, but we do see in their minds things that the reader has already kind of figured out, but puzzle pieces coming together. And while I don't think it's a big pivotal chapter, I do believe it does two things. It sets the stage for, I think, the distrust that some of the Ajas have for each other and some of the sisters have for each other. And also, it really sets the stage for what drives Moraine. She cannot stand that there's a mystery that she can't solve. She's going to get behind it. You see her greedy determination coming out again. And it's not so much just something she wants to do, it's more of a character trait, something she has to do.
I agree that this is a setup chapter more so than moving the plot forward very much. But that's one reason why I think it's good for us to look at 2 chapters in an episode. I know some podcasts that go a single chapter per episode, and I think that's a lot more difficult to find as much to talk about in this book that is a lot of world building and setup in the first place. This whole novel is. Every now and then we're going to hit one of these chapters where not a lot happens, but as a rereader, you can pick up more of why this chapter is there anyway. I think they can be a little frustrating the first time to read through, but now, especially this one being written around the same time as there being a tower split in the main series, just chronologically it was being written around the same time, you can see the seeds of all the fracturing happening here.
Yes. Probably seeds that have been visible for decades, if not centuries before this time, but we begin to see it through the eyes of someone with a little more innocence. Yes.
Yeah, I think Moiraine and Siuan are just at the point in their development where they have been socialized in the tower long enough that they can begin to see some flaws there.
Yes. Yeah, not enough to have them jaded or distrustful of sisters. Now, obviously, there are some sisters they like more than others for good reason. Elena being one who terrifies them. Yet at the same time, they don't really perceive the schism that's developing within the tower or has developed within the tower. As far as Moraine here, you see, again, a few elements of her personality that we're familiar with. Again, when it comes to the desire to be able to question his mothers more closely. She even references in her mind that it would be played like the Estemar, except with the entire world at stake. And she says it's far from a task she would relish, yet how to resist imagining. So I don't think she, in her mind, has outlined the flaws in Tamara's plan here of getting these names the way you did, yet she wishes there could be so much more. She wished she could be there and question them and pick up on things. Because again, most any mother would not want to admit her boy child was born on the slopes of Dragon Mount.
Right.
Because then he could possibly be the dragon reborn. Just the thoughts of a man channeling is horrifying to anybody with any sense. So no mother would want that for her sons. In regards to the Sun Throne, she had some kind of internal thoughts on the way the tower is thinking of using her to intervene in the politics there, to possibly put an Aes Sedai on the throne. She said the tower was no less implacable in its weaving than the wheel of time itself. So, and for the same reason, they oftentimes saw people as threads in this, how they wove into the pattern. So the individual's desires, the individual's talents, their wants, all of that is going to be secondary or ignored completely if the tower thought it could gain more power and influence by putting an Aes Sedai on the throne. They would willingly do it, despite the fact that Moiraine wants nothing to do with that. They don't ask; they just do.
Right.
And things we've already touched on before, but again, it was kind of cute to see it. As Moiraine is walking through the green quarters, she sees all the warders around, and she describes them, and they're not all like you would think of as being just big, strong, muscular warriors, but some short and stocky. So, she describes people of different ethnic backgrounds, some of them you can tell by the bells in their hair and the
Mhm.
veil one wears over his mustaches and things. So you can see that people's being represented there, but by the lethal presence of each and every one of them. At one point, she even said that they were. She compared them to a caped eagle she had seen years ago when she had been out hawking with friends. And said that they were full of self-knowledge. They were absolutely sure of their own capabilities and their own capacity for violence. So every single warder, even though he's completely different physically, some were, playing musical instruments. One was a young man learning to dance with the Aes
Mhm.
Sedai he was with. So you see
Mhm.
all these differences in them, yet they all have the same thing: this capacity for instant violence, because
Mm.
they are violence incarnate when need be. Again, Moiraine, and this is part I thought was cute. She was scandalized just by thinking about how in the Green Aja, many of these warders lived in the apartment with the sisters. And
Yeah.
just this puritanical view of it's like, oh my goodness, some of them actually live in the apartment with the sisters. Of course, that is not known among the other Ajas, just the Green. But just seeing her perspective on this in terms of what could be something chilling and was at one point a fact-finding mission. She's keeping her eyes open, trying to learn everything she can about each person, because that's just Moiraine. That's just who she is.
Mhm.
And part of the Des Mora that she was steeped in as a child, yet it has to be scandalized by the fact that these men are living there in the apartments with their Aes Sedai.
Did you notice a cameo from a certain rugged mountain man we meet later
I did not.
as a warder? Elias is one of the warders that in this chapter. And he doesn't
Was
have his
named there.
ponytail yet. He's like more clean cut. He's got a beard, but he doesn't have his like long gray hippie ponytail.
Elias, yes,
Oh,
it was the
sorry.
two that was fighting. Yeah,
Oh,
there we go.
okay.
Yeah, Rena Halfton.
Mm.
She was urging them on with a wide smile, calling, "Well struck, Wayland. Oh, very well, Elias." She said, for size, they might have been twins, though one was dark and clean shaven, the other fair with a short beard. Wow. Again, just shows the detail of
Yeah.
just the world building here. And the fact there are very few, throwaway, castaway people. Everybody has a place, as a niche here.
They really do. You mentioned some about Moiraine being curious about internal Aja politics, like within
Yes.
the Green, some of their symbols and everything. And it got me thinking about the purpose of the Ajas. They all have the purpose that they say they're there for, but some of them we've seen have their own mission creep, like the Tower as a whole that we talked about a lot in episode 1.
Yes.
What do you think about the purpose of the Green Aja? Because to me, they
Oh.
seem pretty useless. Like, what are they, the actual Aes Sedai, doing?
Right. Because they are supposed to be the war Aja. And we know they
battle
study
Aja.
war. Yes, they bring, it's one of the reasons they have multiple warders per sister if they choose.
Mm-hmm.
But I had not thought about what do they do all these years. I guess in my mind, I had sort of imagined that perhaps they interfaced in more with the Tower Guard. They worked with them. They taught theory, but you can only teach theory so much.
Right.
You can only practice battle so much without actual war.
Yeah.
And we did not see them out engaging the Aiel in this Aiel war. In fact, it even mentioned in there that the sisters had not, participated in a war since the Trolloc Wars.
And that's been 1,000 years at least.
Yes. So within each Aja, and that's something I will have to look at for our upcoming episodes.
Mm-hmm.
They each have a stated purpose, and they do fulfill that. But I think they each would have sort of a secondary purpose or a secondary tertiary purposes beyond that, things that they're doing. And in some of those that may have come to the forefront more than others.
Yeah, I think like with the Greys, you have them as counselors. They actually mediate disputes.
Yes.
They probably, they are mediators during treaties when nations are at war and those types of things. But the Green, here's how I imagine the Green. This is never mentioned, but this is how I think they probably would have had their mission creep, what they actually spend their days doing. I want to see the Greens leading like martial art classes, but like ones that don't actually, they're not going to be useful in the war. You know, you can get these forms down really
Yes.
well, but it's going to be completely useless on a battlefield unless you have battle experience. So I'm imagining them like leading sunrise Tai Chi
Tai Chi,
courses, like
yes,
out on
yes.
like out in the courtyards. I want to see that from the Greens, but we don't. But that's just
Yeah.
what I believe that they're
Yeah.
doing.
That would have been awesome if it was incorporated into the story. I guess in our minds it can be, because there has to be so many untold stories
Yeah,
from the Wheel of Time.
that's my headcanon. Sunrise Tai Chi
Yes.
lessons in the courtyards.
Uh, and how much of that would have been used just as daily exercise, and how much of it would have been used as penance for rule
Right.
infractions.
Yeah.
Because we know they use them to scrub pots and floors and everything else. So
You can have a real Karate Kid situation there with
yes, yes.
with chores. That's
I'd
really
never
all I
considered
had.
that. Yeah, me as well. I think again, these are short chapters, not exactly pivotal, but they do have a lot of fun information in there.
Yeah, it is fun. Thank you, dear listener. If you have any questions, thoughts, or feedback about this episode, you can find me, Lajara, on Twitter at LAJARASEDAI. I'm at Lajara Sedai on Twitter. We also have a website up now. It's http://LajaraDane, that's DAYNE, .wixsite, wixsite.com/Wheel of Mind. You can download our episodes and stream them there. Thanks for listening. Tell me a little bit about your history reading The Wheel of Time.
It's been probably 24, 25 years ago that I began the series. I had, I think, the first 3 or 4 books of the series. And of course, this began with Eye of the World, and immediately fell in love with it, because I've been in love with fantasy for years anyway. And this is such a well-built and beautiful world that's being created, and it just instantly draws you in. I can remember, my daughter wanting to know the name of the characters and the horses on the cover. So, went through all of that. It just, I have all these wonderful memories of it. After a few years, I got really tired of waiting 2 and 3 years for a book to come out, because I would pick up the newest one, run, get it immediately as soon as it's available. I would begin to read it, and I had forgotten who half of the people were, and forgotten the situation they were left in from the previous book. There's just too much time between releases. So I began purchasing the books as they came out, but I didn't read them. And then in 2017, I had all the books collected. I decided to, just dedicate a few months of time and go through and read the entire series. And that was the first time I had just taken it from beginning to end. And it still blows me away to this point. So I've only read through the series, the complete series, one time. Some books I've read 2 and 3 times, but I've only read through the complete series once.
Yeah.
But it's to me just a beautiful, intriguing series. I love the structure that the magic is built on. It's always important to me in fantasy that there be a logical structure to it. It's got to make sense, real world sense. And I think he did that in a way that was intriguing and different from everyone else, especially the fact of the source being divided into the male half and the female half. That's so different from anything you see anywhere else. And so everything about the series has been intriguing to me, and I really love it and enjoy doing this podcast with you.
Yeah, it's been really fun. Thanks for sharing your history and your love of it. So did you do that thing where you would reread some of the previous books when a new one would come out to try to catch up, or did you just read the new one and feel like I'm kind of lost and then quit reading them?
Read the new one, began to feel lost. We'd give up on it. It was just, again, too much time in between releases.
Yeah.
Of course, the end product was well worth the wait. I do wish, for his sake, Robert Jordan had been able to complete the series, but I think they could not have found anyone who would have finished it any better than Brandon Sanderson did.
I know. So, it's so touching to read the foreword to The Gathering Storm.
Yes.
And because of that, I've actually started reading forewords or acknowledgments in the beginnings of other books, but they're
Yes.
not interesting in most other books or touching.
Right.
But I've
Right.
started paying attention to them, and especially in Sanderson's books, he writes good ones.
Yes.
And I've actually started paying attention to those. Like the one in Way of Kings, he goes on about, I'm trying to do something new here, and I've got all these wonderful people doing this amazing art that pops up throughout this book.
Right. I think what helps is that Sanderson is one who he wants to make it real. He's not just putting on something. He's not saying something just to say it. It's kind of like he's pulling back the curtain and just
Yeah,
talking directly to the reader. Yeah,
it
this is
really
kind of what I'm
feels
going
that
through,
way.
and here's what I'm referencing, and here's why this work was so important to me, and I like that.
Yeah, he comes off super genuine like that. Like you were saying, I don't know if you've seen this, but on YouTube, he teaches a class on writing science fiction and fantasy, and
Yes.
he lets people just put those lectures up freely available because now that he's super successful, I mean, he wants to share that and kind of give
yes.
back. He just seems like an all-around great guy. So like you said, I don't think there could have been anybody better to continue the series other than Jordan himself. So in the circumstances, I think Harriet made an incredible choice to approach him about it.
Yes, I agree. I agree. And I believe he tried the best he could to stay true to the story and stay true to himself. So he didn't try to be Robert Jordan, but he didn't try to vary the story either. So
yeah. I guess transitioning to my history with the Wheel of Time, I'm more of what you could call I guess like a heritage reader of fantasy. I read it a lot as a child, and it was important in my household, but around the time I got to college, I felt really jaded with fantasy. A lot of it I had read was starting to seem really formulaic, and also I was noticing a lot of sexism in it at the time that I wasn't aware of as much growing up. I'm like, okay, there's some dumb boy who lives on a farm, and then he's a chosen one, and there might be some girls who have a few speaking parts. It was really, I was tired of it for a while. And so for many years I put it away, and I didn't read much at all for pleasure for many years, just because of going to school for a long time and reading so much for classes. And then about 2 or 3 years ago, I started reading again, actually reading the Song of Ice and Fire books to keep up with Game of Thrones.
yes.
Not keep up with, but to learn more about it, because I watched the show with a book reader and thought, oh, this sounds way deeper than the show. I really want to find out more about it. And now I'm in that awful place of waiting for books, like you mentioned,
Yes.
and looking for other things to read, and realizing that there's still good fantasy out there. And I realized that George R.R. Martin was inspired a lot by Robert Jordan. So I decided it was a good time to go back and look at that. And then I heard about the television show that's actually filming right now in Prague.
Yes, I'm so excited about that.
I know. So I thought it was as good a time as any. So I sped through. I was lucky to have the whole series already available when I first started reading it. So I read through all the books in about 8 months last year, but I would say that I cheated on that time a little bit, because some of it was audiobooks that I would have going on long driving trips. And so
Right.
I got through especially some of those middle books that way. So going back through and having a chance to catch a lot of the things that I missed is really exciting. And I've been listening to a lot of other podcasters and just gearing up for the show and wanting to make sure that I've got a strong background in the books so I can see how they're adapting it and maybe why, and making some fun predictions. But it sounds like Rafe Judkins, his favorite character, he said on Twitter, is Moiraine. So I thought, what better time to delve into her character?
Right.
And
right.
also just happened to be a thing that I hadn't seen done yet. So it seems like a good time.
Right. And I enjoy trying to study her perspective, because usually when I'm reading a novel, I am speed reading through it. I'm trying to get the story, get to the end. And on a second read, I tend to appreciate the story a little more. I already know the exciting things that's going to happen, so I want to catch all the little details. I'm the same way when I watch movies and shows. Anything I like to watch it more than once, or I like to experience it more than once. To catch the nuances, to catch the foreshadowings, just all the fun things that you miss the first time through.
Yeah.
But I've never studied one to this depth just for the purpose of sharing it on a podcast. And
Mm.
I'm catching so many more things I would not have thought of otherwise because I'm not just rereading it. I'm studying it. I'm trying to stop and ask why. It's an entirely different experience, but it's one I'm enjoying. It's one that brings the characters to life that much more to me.
Yeah, I'm glad you're enjoying it so much. I think, you don't really know something until you try to teach it to somebody else.
True,
And
very true.
I feel that that's what we're doing and trying to lead a discussion here, even if nobody ever listens to us and it's just us two over the Wi-Fi just discussing with each other. It seems like it's worth it to dig
Yes,
into the chapters in this way that I haven't done before.
yes, yeah, it is. Well, about the show,
Mhm.
um, what what kind of things can we look forward to with the show?
Well, Rafe Judkins is a super fan. It sounds like he's very, very into this show. And I don't know that that's always the case when you get adaptations. I think sometimes
Correct.
directors might be given a show, given the green light for something, and they think, well, this would be a good idea. And they read the books or they hire people who've read the books to help them adapt the material. But Rafe is actually a rereading fan, and they have actually hired a lot of consultants who are ultra rereaders. Like Sarah
Mm,
Nakamura is one of these, and she's particularly active on Twitter and promoting it and everything. And she's
mhm.
traveled with them to Prague as well. But she's read the series, at least the first few books, something like 30 times, because
Oh
she
my,
would like reread all the previous ones every time a new one came out. And she's been doing
yes.
rereads and rereads. Tor.com for several years has had kind of a reread schedule going that I think a lot of people have been following for a
Mhm.
few years. So she's been in that culture and a part of the fandom and a part of the dragonmount.com forums and everything, which is
Yes.
something I haven't really engaged with. I'm just starting to get engaged with the fandom in that way.
Right.
And so it's encouraging to me to see that there are people who love the material and would want to see it done justice, a part of the
Right.
project.
I mean, obviously there have to be some changes because it's a different medium of entertainment, but it's in keeping those changes true to the story that, as you said, a lot of people don't do. A lot of producers and directors, they just make shows or they make movies and they want to tell a story their way.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be entirely, they may change the entire tone and tenor and just the very life of the story until it's not the same story. And so, yeah, I'm glad to hear just their dedication to it. And I'm like a lot of fans. I'm hoping they stay true to the story. A lot of things will have to be changed. A lot of things will have to be cut out. But stay true to the story. Stay true to the characters.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the people they've gathered for characters, I can look at them and I can say, okay, yes, that I can see that person. It may not be whom I visualize, but I can see that person in that role.
Yeah,
Some of
I'm
them I've
starting
looked
to
at and
see
I've
some of them.
thought, makeup can only do so much. You're not you're not the character they describe.
Yeah.
Rand needs to be very tall. Perrin needs to be very, very muscular and stocky. We
Mm.
don't need a wimpy guy as Perrin. So,
Yeah.
and I'm not making inferences just to those two. I'm just speaking in general.
Right.
Um, and it's going to be difficult without some special effects to capture that agelessness of the Aes Sedai.
Right. I wonder if they're even going to be able to focus on that as a
I,
thing. They may
I
have to
have
drop
too.
that. I don't know what that's
Right.
going to look like.
I mean, unless they do some airbrush things, just so everyone has a
Mm-hmm.
certain look. But I don't know how that would come about. I really
Yeah,
don't.
I've even had
Um,
trouble imagining like that quality anyway throughout the books, because
right.
at first I thought that meant, okay, they all look young, but maybe there's this knowing look in their eyes. It seems like, okay, she seems more mature than like 25,
Right.
but her face looks 25. But
Right.
we see, like, when Siwan gets stilled, her and
Yes.
Leanne, they lose 25 years. Like, they look younger and hot,
Yes.
apparently. Like, and so I that kind of warped my understanding of it. I'm like, I don't think I know what this ageless thing even looks like. I
Right.
can't picture that.
I equate it to when I was a child, a very young boy. There was many women whom I looked up to that they didn't look old and they didn't look young. They were just a woman. And as an adult, I might meet them again many years later, and I was surprised by the fact they had to have been in their 20s when I knew them before. Yet they just seemed like a mature adult woman. And there are some mature adult women who just, they seem younger. They don't, it's not just the wrinkles and things like that, and the frailty in the hands. Although I see that as part of it with the Aes Sedai, just an unwrinkled look. They may carry themselves as a dignified, 50-year-old woman would, who's in good health. That's how I pictured it in my mind. But there's something so tenuous and nebulous, you can't define it. And so I don't know how you replicate it.
Right.
The closest thing I could think of as an adult was airbrush pictures.
Right.
Of seeing women who, we've all seen it, airbrush still shots, so that they still look old, but the wrinkles were gone, and you could tell there's an age, but there's a graceful age there. I'm wondering if they will not do something like that, or if they'll just cheapen it and take a younger woman, give her a gray wig, and claim that she's 200 years old. We don't know how they're going to handle it.
I think at least the actress they've chosen for Moiraine, Rosamund Pike, has I've seen a lot of different facial expressions of hers, and I feel like she can pull that off in terms of, you can make any actress look younger than what they are. They do that all the time in television. They hire, 25-year-olds to play 15-year-olds, and exactly. So she already, and she's actually right at the age Moiraine should be. She's like 40, 42, something like that. But she still has a pretty young appearance, but also very knowing somehow. I think it's the fact that her eyes have this slightly hooded look to them, so that they're a little more not sleepy looking, but like lower lidded, where she doesn't look surprised by much, because her eyes are a little more it makes her look very nonplussed and unruffled, and I think that's going to be great for the character.
Yes.
But this is just from looking at still shots so far, but I can already see her as Moiraine really well.
Yes. I think we may have to settle for something like that. Women who are very self-aware of who they are, have a lot of confidence, are fairly young in age, but can pass for someone younger, and we just have to go for that. There may not be a way to look at them and say from the screen that lady's an Aes Sedai. So we may have to settle for that in the show.
Yeah, I think that's a plot point that seems like a super important part of the world, but it could be one that the ageless look could probably go away, and I think we could still have most of the spirit of the story preserved.
Right. We may just have to settle for looking on their hand for a serpent ring.
Yeah, there you go. And it makes sense because most of our characters in the beginning don't know the look of an Aes Sedai anyway.
That's true.
So, I mean, for a long time, it's not until book 2 that we even learn about the ageless face. So you can have all the Eye of the World adapted faithfully without that ever coming up. Well, I think we might have exhausted that topic for now, and I know that you will probably have to go soon. Why don't you sign us off? Tell them goodbye, Giskel.
Goodbye, Giskel.